Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Stephen in Maine, Yehuda in South Carolina, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Nation, they're in the Bronx, Paula in the Great Northwest Guy in Ohio, Sharon in New Jersey, Elvis in the great state of New York, Joe in the Inland Empire, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Belle in Texas, Nancy in North Carolina, Frank in San Pedro, Chaim in Florida, Marie in Freeport, Ella in Southern California, Camille in Texas and Israel. Welcome, everybody. Also, Lorraine in Texas. Making a SIYUM today, Baruch Hashem, completing our journey through tractate Horayos with God's help. And we'll immediately open the first page and actually do the first page of tractate Zevachim. So they're both short, so it should not be too much of a time challenge. You know, Nina's away, I'm incompetent. Don't have a l'chaim here. But okay, my l'chaim. I'll have it with dinner. Okay, we are, our two dafs, page 14 here in Tractate Horayos, and page 2, which every tractate opens on page 2. But we actually picked this up near, maybe 60% of the way down, page 13b. Page 14 is super short. Okay, so this is continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 7, the final Mishnah of this chapter 3 in Horayos. And this was talking about, if you only save one life, or if you're going to redeem people from captivity, in what order are you going to redeem them? And then there's this precedence that, this person goes before that person, goes before that person. What are you saying? You're better than I am? How can we say such a thing? But it's actually the people that are higher up in this order of precedence. It's really because they perform more mitzvahs. That's really the distinction. There are more mitzvahs incumbent upon them. In the case of a high priest who's constantly performing mitzvahs on behalf of the whole nation, that's what gives him precedence. It's not that one category of people is better than another. It's that there are more mitzvahs being performed by that person, and that's why we'll save him first. And that was also the distinction between men and women. If you're going to save one first, you have to save the man first, simply because he's obligated in more mitzvahs. But when it comes to this danger that she would be degraded, humiliated, God forbid, raped, if there's a danger of that, then the woman gets redeemed first from captivity. Now that we're talking about order of precedence, and this idea, who's going to become ritually impure to bury an unattended corpse, as between the priest anointed for war or the deputy high priest. The deputy high priest really has no duties, but he's waiting in the wing just in case the high priest gets incapacitated, and then we have to have a deputy high priest ready to go to serve on behalf of the nation. And that's why we would say that the priest anointed for war should become tamei to bury that body, because that means he would be unavailable for a week to serve in the temple, and we can't risk that with the deputy high priest. Now that we've been talking about these kinds of matters, they're going to sort of go one step further, or one step further afield, let's say, and actually talk about honor and the honor that is due to certain people. And we saw yesterday this idea that when the Nassi would enter a room, everybody would stand up. At the Nassi, the head of the Sanhedrin, everybody would stand up, and they would remain standing until he sat down and told them all to sit. If the deputy Nassi came in, everyone sort of on the aisle would stand up so that he would walk down a kind of hallway made of people who were standing, but the rest of the people in the room could remain seated. And if the Chacham entered the room, Chacham is an interesting word. It basically means sage, a wise one or a scholar. Then people would rise as he passes, but then they would sit down. They wouldn't keep that sort of hallway of standing people erect until he reached his seat. So 3 orders in descending order of how much honor is paid to this person because of the office that he occupies. And in modern times, we don't do that. If we're talking about a recognized rabbi, the head of a yeshiva, or one of the gedolim, one of the great rabbis of the generation, then when he enters a room, everybody stands up. There's no different kinds of standing up. Either you get that kind of respect or you don't. Okay, now, Rabbi Yochanan says, this Mishnah, i.e. our preceding Baraisa about the different ways that people would stand in order to recognize the honor of the Nassi, the deputy Nassi, or the Chacham, was taught during the days of Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel, who was the Nassi in his generation. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was the Nassi. Rabbi Meir was the Chacham, right, the number 3. And Rabbi Nasan was the deputy Nassi, the number 2. So when Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was there, everyone would rise before him. When Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan would enter, everybody would rise before them, kind of the way it's done in modern times. There were no distinctions made between the type of standing up for the Nassi, the deputy Nassi, or the Chacham. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel said, shouldn't there be a conspicuous distinction between me and them in terms of the manner in which deference is shown? Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel instituted the provisions delineated in this Baraisa that distinguish between the Nassi and his subordinates with regard to the deference shown to them. Now, I want us to keep something in mind here. When we're talking about Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel, when we're talking about Rabbi Meir, when we're talking about Rabbi Nasan, we're talking about Torah luminaries. These are Chachamim. These are our sages. These were men of impeccable honor and midos, character traits. So if we're reading a story and it seems like somebody's being petty, somebody's being jealous, they're just playing politics, maybe there's something to that. More likely, details are being left out of the story, and we don't have the full picture. And so I am urging you, as your teacher in this class, do not judge our sages according to our standards or our sense of who should do what. We don't have the whole story. And these are people, just way beyond us in their refinement of character. Okay, so as a starting place, if Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was saying there needs to be a greater honor accorded to the office of the Nassi, it's not because he needed greater honor for himself. He was a person of humility and refined characteristics. But it was the job of the Nassi to make such rulings, and he was saying that the office of the Nassi needs to be recognized as such, perhaps because of the exigencies of what was going on in that time, and that there should be respect paid to the Sanhedrin. It should be understood, that the Sanhedrin is issuing laws, and those decrees issued by the rabbis on behalf of the nation need to be heeded, right? Need to be heeded. And this was a time, not too much later than the destruction of the Second Temple, when the sages were working out what Judaism would look like in the absence of the Holy Temple and in the absence of the offerings. And that's what we're going to be reading about in Zevachim later today as we open that tractate. But they're now designing a new kind of portable Judaism entirely based in Torah and the traditions going back to Mount Sinai, but in the absence of a Holy Temple and its offerings. And they did a great job, because here we still are, learning these laws, practicing our religion 2,000 years later. So let's keep that in mind, as Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel is saying, no, we need to have a distinction between how people honor the Nassi, the deputy Nassi, and the Chacham. So that day, when Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel instituted these provisions, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan were not there. The following day, when they came to the study hall, they saw that the people did not stand before them as the matter was typically done. And they said, "What is this?" And the people said to them, "This is what Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel instituted." So Rabbi Meir said to Rabbi Nasan, "I am the Chacham, and you are the deputy Nassi. Let us devise a matter and do to him as he did to us." Now, I'm sure it wasn't lost on Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel that he was instituting these new rules when the number 2 and number 3 guy were not there, and apparently without consulting with them. Why would he do that? Again, there's all kinds of background here that we're missing. For all I know, there was already an issue going on. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was a descendant of Hillel, who was a Nassi in an earlier generation. He was also a great scholar in his own right, but maybe people were whispering about him that, he got this office because of his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, but he doesn't really merit it. Maybe what was really going on is that there were other scholars among, the Sanhedrin, people, who were a little bit more learned, book learned, right? They had a greater understanding of certain laws, greater memory, etc. But perhaps they were not as effective at running the Sanhedrin, which at this point had been relocated to Yavne, and now the Sanhedrin was functioning, also as a school, as a yeshiva, as a place of learning, but especially as a body of scholars who were now promulgating decrees and laws that were vitally necessary to the nation, so that the nation would not fall apart. Again, they had to now extend, the teachings. We're going to keep learning how sacrifices are brought. We're going to keep studying those laws, but we also have to understand what Judaism is going to look like post the temple, right? Beyond the temple, now that the temple has been destroyed. And so that might have required not only great understanding of the law, but great understanding of people, great understanding of politics, great understanding of how to interact with the Roman occupying power so that people don't get genocided by the Romans, which did happen not that much earlier than this, in the time of Rabbi Akiva, in the Bar Kokhba revolt. So there was so much going on behind the scenes that is not on the page in this story. Okay, so he instituted this. Perhaps something had already been going on with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan, and Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel needed to put them in their place a little bit. And so he, just created this different kind of honor that would be accorded the office of the Nassi, the office of the deputy Nassi, and the office of the Chacham. But they didn't like it. They weren't consulted about it, and then they were receiving less honor than Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. So now they start hatching a plan. Let us devise a matter and do to him as he did to us. What shall we do to him? Let us say to him, reveal to us tractate Okatzim, which he does not know. This is a somewhat obscure tractate in the Mishnah, having to do with when you're tithing fruits and other kinds of produce. Do the skins and stems of the fruit get counted in the weight of the produce when you're calculating the amount of tithe that has to be taken? Somewhat obscure, lesser known, and they happen to know that while they had expertise in that tractate, that Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel did not. So they'll say, okay, so we'll ask him in front of the rest of the yeshiva, in front of the other students, teach us about tractate Okatzim, right? And once it is clear that he did not learn it, he will have nothing to say. And then we will say to him, oh, who can express the mighty acts of the Lord? He who can express the mighty acts of the Lord shall make all his praises heard. From Psalm 106, indicating for whom is it becoming to express the mighty acts of the Lord? It is becoming for one who is capable of making all his praises heard, and not for one who does not know one of the tractates. And that way, we will expose him as someone who's not as learned as we are, and we will remove him from his position as Nassi, and then I will be the deputy Nassi, and you will be the Nassi. So this was Rabbi Meir's plan, right? And he said it, to the deputy Nassi, Rabbi Nasan, and he said, well, this way we'll remove him, and then you'll become the Nassi, I'll be the deputy Nassi, and we won't have to submit to the authority of this guy that, we're not so happy with, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. Rabbi Yaakov ben Korshe heard them talking, right? He heard this plan being hatched. And he said, perhaps, heaven forfend, this matter will come to a situation of humiliation for Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. And he did not wish to speak criticism or gossip about Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan. So, right, he didn't want to rat them out, but he also didn't want Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel to be humiliated. So what did he do? He went and he sat behind the upper story where Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel lived. And he explicated tractate Okatzim, meaning he studied it aloud. And he repeated it over and over again. He studied it aloud and he repeated it. Right? So he parked himself outside Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel's window and kept repeating over the teachings of this obscure tractate with which Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan were planning to humiliate Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. Now, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel is sitting in his apartment listening to somebody outside his window going over and over this obscure tractate. And he was wise enough to say to himself, what is this that is transpiring before us? Perhaps, heaven forfend, there is something transpiring in the study hall. Very weird that somebody's out there at all behind his apartment, outside the window, and doing this particular tractate over and over again. So Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was plugged into the language of events and realizing something's going on. And again, maybe there was already some stuff going on, so that in further reason for him to clue in to what's happening in front of him. And so he suspected that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan were planning something, right? Just from hearing somebody reciting a tractate outside his window, that seems like a reach, unless there was already some stuff going on. So Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel concentrated, and he studied tractate Okatzim. The following day, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan said to him, let the master come and teach a lesson in tractate Okatzim. So he was ready. He began and he stated the lesson that he had prepared. After he completed teaching the tractate, he said to them, if I had not studied the tractate, you would have humiliated me. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel then commanded all those present, and they expelled Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan from the study hall as punishment. Because remember, it's not just some kind of a personal matter among colleagues, right? They had rebelled against the office of the Nassi, and that can't be tolerated. So he expelled them. Now, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan, at the end of the day, they're sages, and they want to be involved in the most advanced Torah learning that's going on in the nation, which is in this yeshiva and in this gathering of scholars that's going on probably in the city of Yavne. So what did they do? They would sit outside the study hall, and they would write difficulties on a scrap of paper, and they would throw them into the study hall. Right? They were the keenest minds in the room. So when people were just listening to lectures inside and they didn't really, grasp the subtleties of it and what questions should be asked and what objections should be made, they, from outside the windows, would grasp those things. And so they would write down the most pertinent questions or comments, put them on a piece of paper, and throw them in the room. Then the sages inside the study hall would discuss those notes, and those difficulties that were resolved were resolved. And as for those that were not resolved, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan wrote resolutions on a scrap of paper and threw them into the study hall. In other words, they're still running the study hall. They're still running the discussions because they're the sharpest knives in the drawer, so to speak. So Rabbi Yosei said to the sages, how is it that the Torah, embodied in the preeminent Torah scholars, is outside and we're inside? What's going on? We're taking notes through the window. The sharpest members of our group are outside. They've been expelled from the study hall, but they're still the sharpest people, and they're still leading the discussion. This is untenable. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel got wind of what's going on, or they complained to him, but at any rate, he's now addressing the situation. So Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel said to them, let us admit them to the study hall. You're right. They're the sharpest knives in the drawer. They need to be part of the discussion. But we can't overlook the little rebellion that they led against the office of the Nassi. So we will penalize them in that we will not cite halacha, we will not cite laws, Torah laws, Jewish laws, in their names. Think how often we say that Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, who said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, who said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, who said in the name of, right, this transmission, this chain of transmission of certain teachings. So now Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel is saying what they did is very serious, and they are going to lose the right to be cited in that chain of transmission. Laws that they teach will no longer be taught in their name. So they cited statements of Rabbi Meir in the name of acherim. Acherim means others, as in others say. So when we're reading in the Gemara, right, and it says, well, Rabbi Yehuda says, and Rabbi Shimon says, and others say actually means Rabbi Meir. But the reason his name was and we do cite Rabbi Meir by name all over the place. And not only that, but when we're talking about Mishnahs that are unattributed, those were usually formulated by Rabbi Meir. I mean, he's truly one of the most important sages in the whole Talmud. But in many places, it says others say, and that was Rabbi Meir. And the reason why he lost having his name on those particular laws is because of this incident that we're reading about here. So acherim is how they would cite laws for Rabbi Meir, and they cited statements of Rabbi Nasan in the name of yesh omerim, right? Some say. So others say, quote, others say, that's Rabbi Meir, and some say, that's Rabbi Nasan. Both of them penalized in this way. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Nasan were shown a message in their dreams. Go appease Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. Right? And we say the dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. So this was a message from heaven. You guys were wrong. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was right. Go appease him, i.e., go apologize. Rabbi Nasan went and apologized. Rabbi Meir did not go. He said in his heart, matters of dreams are insignificant. When Rabbi Nasan went, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel said to him, although the ornate belt, i.e., the importance of your father, was effective in enabling you to become deputy Nassi, as Rabbi Nasan's father was the exilarch in Bavel. Right? Remember, the head of the Jewish community in Bavel was known as the exilarch. This was a position of royalty. Second, obviously, to the Persian king, because Bavel was part of the Persian Empire at that time, or the Persian emperor, but treated with tremendous dignity, respect, and power. Right? The exilarch had real power within the Persian Empire, not just over the Jews. I mean, he was somebody who was consulted. It was like a high government office, the exilarch. And Rabbi Nasan was the son of the exilarch. And the exilarch, by the way, was a descendant of King David, right? This was like the king in exile. That's who the exilarchs were. So they were scholars, as Rabbi Nasan is, but Rabbi Nasan was a descendant of King David. Right, so let me go back. So when Rabbi Nasan went to appease him, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel said to him, although the belt, i.e. the importance of your father, was effective in enabling you to become a deputy Nasan, to become a deputy Nassi, will it render you Nassi as well? Right? So Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel is, he's letting him know where he stands. Are you here because you're a sage of that level? Probably, as we saw before, that he was still running discussions from the outside. And he said, and that's why you're not only a sage learning with us, and there's other sharp sages who are not elevated to become Chacham or deputy Nassi or Nassi, because again, there's political implications to those offices. Because the exilarch is your father, okay, you're the deputy Nassi. Are you counting on the fact that because you're the exilarch's son, you're going to become the Nassi? Which, remember, was Rabbi Meir's plan. Rabbi Nasan would become the Nassi, Rabbi Meir would become the deputy Nassi, and out goes Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. That plan backfired on Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel is saying to Rabbi Nasan right now, it's great for you, it's wonderful, you're the deputy Nassi. Don't be trying to get my job. If you're not angling to remove me, we can work together. But I don't want to hear from you again that you are trying to usurp my office. Years later, Rebbe, right? So this is now Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who is, I believe, the son of Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel, right? And that's why he succeeded him as the Nassi. But also the greatest sage of the generation and the one who oversaw the project of redacting the Mishnah into writing. And again, remember, most unattributed Mishnahs in the Mishnah were formulated by Rabbi Meir. Why are they unattributed? Because Rebbe remembered how Rabbi Meir, sought to usurp his father, Rebbe's father, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. Okay, so years later, Rebbe taught his own son, Rabbi Shimon. Right? Rabbi Shimon is the grandson of Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel. So Rebbe taught his son, Rabbi Shimon, that acherim say, right? Others say, if it was considered a substitute, it would not be sacrificed. This is a technical matter within the law of tithing. When you're tithing animals, a shepherd who has to tithe the newborns every year. So there was a teaching. It doesn't really matter what the particulars of that law are, but it was being cited in whose name? Acherim. Others say. We know what that means, right? Right. So years later, Rabbi Yehuda Nassi taught Rabbi Shimon his son that acherim say if it was considered a substitute, then it would not be sacrificed. Rebbe's son said to him, "Who are these sages whose water we drink, but whose names we do not mention?" Right? Whose water we drink. We cite Torah their Torah, right? Water is always a metaphor for Torah. So who are these sages whose water we drink, but whose names we do not mention? So Rebbe said to his son, Rabbi Shimon, they are people who sought to abolish your honor and the honor of your father's house. Right? So remember, this did become a dynastic position. Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel was a Nassi, and who was he succeeded by? His son, Rebbe, who was certainly worthy of the honor, and who would then be succeeded by his son. Why was it dynastic? Why was it dynastic? Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said at the time that Jerusalem was falling, was granted a favor by the Roman general Vespasian. I'll give you your wish. What do you want? He couldn't save Jerusalem, although he kicked himself maybe for not asking. But he said, "Give me Yavne and its sages and Rabbi Gamliel." I think at that point, who was Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel's father. So he wanted these descendants of Hillel to occupy the office of Nassi to ensure Jewish continuity. There would be enough problems in the absence of the temple. He didn't want people fighting and arguing over who should serve as Nassi. And that's why having this heritage was important politically. So let's keep going here. Right? So why are we not mentioning their names? Said Rabbi Shimon to his father Rebbe. And Rebbe is telling him, because these people that we're talking about, Rabbi Meir, right, acherim, sought to remove our family from the position of Nassi. That's why we don't say his name. So Rabbi Shimon said to his father Rebbe, citing the verse, quote, "Their love as well as their hatred and their envy is long ago perished," from Ecclesiastes 9:6, meaning, okay, that incident happened a long time ago, and everybody who was involved is dead. Rabbi Meir is gone, Rabbi Nasan is gone, my grandfather, right, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel is gone. Why don't we just start citing the Torah in the name of the people who created that Torah, those rulings? Therefore, there is no harm in mentioning their names. So Rebbe said to Rabbi Shimon, but it is also stated, the enemy are come to an end, the wasted places are forever, in Psalm 9, verse 7. Although the enemies die, the desolation that they created remains. Therefore, although they are dead, their names should not be mentioned. Rabbi Shimon said to his father, these matters apply in a case where their actions were effective. In the case of these sages, their actions were not effective. They didn't create destruction. They failed in removing our family from the position of Nassi. Rebbe then taught him, the sages said in the name of Rabbi Meir, if it is considered a substitute, it would not be sacrificed. And Rava said, even Rebbe, who is humble, taught the sages said in the name of Rabbi Meir, but he did not say directly, Rabbi Meir said. Right? So they said, okay, we can reinstitute a bunch of these teachers in the name of the original person, Rabbi Meir, but we have to also honor my father who instituted that. We don't say Rabbi Meir's name. And so he said, the sages said in the name of Rabbi Meir, rather than Rabbi Meir said. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel and the rabbis disagreed with regard to this matter. Now, a separate matter. This is a new topic. One of them said Sinai is preferable, and the other one said uprooting mountains is preferable. They're talking about two different qualities of the sages. Sinai means somebody whose encyclopedic memory contains every law that's ever been taught in the oral tradition, and who wrote that law, who issued that ruling, who received that ruling from his teacher, who received it from his teacher, who received it from his teacher. Sometimes we've had Rabbah taught in the name of Rav, who taught in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who taught in the name of Rabbi, etc. Like 6 levels of that. So a person known as Sinai is somebody who knows it all. right? He's just got absolutely like an endless memory, incredible memory, and knew all of the teachings and who originally issued them and the chain of transmission. Somebody who could bring down with perfect recall all of the oral law that existed up until that generation. That's Sinai. An uprooter of mountains is somebody whose analytical ability is so incisive that he's going to have the capacity to develop new rulings, right? There were still unanswered questions, and sometimes, the tradition would not cover the question, right? It's a new question, and there's no answer in the tradition. And for those situations, we need somebody with a huge analytical mind, a genius, not just somebody with an extreme memory, but somebody with extreme processing power. That's an uprooter of mountains. So what they're saying is, okay, if we have to appoint somebody, let's say, to the deputy Nassi position, should we take a Sinai or should we take an uprooter of mountains? Somebody who knows all the tradition or somebody who has incredible capacity to answer questions through his own original thought and analysis? And the Gemara relates that this is not a merely theoretical dispute. Rather, at one time, this argument about which is better, Sinai or an uprooter mountains, had practical ramifications. Rav Yosef was Sinai. A little bit ironic because we'll recall that late in his life, Rav Yosef had trouble. He got sick and couldn't remember things. But for most of his life, he was a Sinai. He knew everything, just remembered everything. Rabbah was an uprooter of mountains. Rabbah was one who had this unbelievable intellect. They sent a message from Bavel, right, the Jewish community in Bavel, to Eretz Yisrael with a question. And it was this question: which takes precedence, Sinai or uprooting mountains? And they sent in response, Sinai is preferable. As the master said, everybody requires the owner of the wheat, right? Everyone, no matter how brilliant they are, needs to know what have all the earlier sages said, so that any new analysis is based on a perfect rendition of the law as it exists at that time. So you need brilliant minds, but if you're going to talk about the leader, you need somebody who's a little bit more, less flashy, a little bit more sort of conservative, so to speak, in terms of not trying to come up with new rulings, but who has got absolute mastery over everything that has been before. So Sinai is preferable. And even so, Rav Yosef, who was the Sinai, did not accept upon himself the appointment of head of the yeshiva. He knew that Rabbah was more qualified, even if he's the Sinai and Rabbah is the uprooter, and it's better to be a Sinai than an uprooter. When it comes to running the yeshiva, Rav Yosef knew that Rabbah was more qualified, and so he humbly stepped aside. And Rabbah reigned, right? He ran the yeshiva in Bavel for 22 years. And then Rabbah died, and then Rav Yosef finally was elevated and became the Rosh Yeshiva. He ran the yeshiva for 2 years near the end of his life. And the Gemara relates that in all those years that Rabbah presided over the academy, Rav Yosef did not even call a bloodletter to his home. Right? Like everyone knew that Rav Yosef could have been the Rosh Yeshiva. If he's not the number one, gadol in the generation in all the Babylonian Jewish community, he's certainly number two and worthy of tremendous respect and dignity. And, you have to accord him all the respect and honor in the world. But he was so humble that he wouldn't even let, a bloodletter, he wouldn't summon a bloodletter to come treat him in his house. He went to the bloodletter's stall in the market, so to speak. Rav Yosef was so humble that he had no airs about himself. He just conducted himself like the most ordinary citizen. And the Gemara relates that Abaye, Rava, Rabbi Zera, and Rabbi Bar Matana were sitting and studying in a group and were in need of a head for their group. And they said, let anyone who will say a matter that cannot be refuted will be the head of our group. Well, everyone made statements, and all the statements were refuted. No one was able to say something that didn't fall apart in the argumentation of the whole group, except Abaye. The statement of Abaye was not refuted. So Rabbi saw that Abaye raised his head, right, meaning that he had emerged from the group as the most significant scholar in the group. And Rabbi said to him, Nachmani, calling Abaye by his name rather than by his nickname, begin and say your lecture. This was Rabbi recognizing that Abaye would be the preeminent sage of the next generation. A dilemma was raised before the sages between Rabbi Zera and Rabbi bar Rab Matana. Which of them is preferable? Rabbi Zera is incisive and raises pertinent difficulties, and Rabbi bar Rab Matana is moderate and not so incisive, but ultimately he draws the appropriate conclusions. And what is the conclusion about this comparison? Which is preferable? And the Gemara concludes, Teku. That dilemma remains unresolved. And with that, we conclude tractate Horayos. And so, as we always do, we read the Hadran at the culmination of every tractate. We shall return to you, tractate Horayos, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, tractate Horayos, and your thoughts are upon us. We will not be forgotten from you, tractate Horayos, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. That first paragraph we read 3 times. We shall return to you, tractate Horayos, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, tractate Horayos, and your thoughts are upon us. We will not be forgotten from you, tractate Horayos, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. We shall return to you, tractate Horayos, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, tractate Horayos, and your thoughts are upon us. We will not be forgotten from you, tractate Horayos, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that your Torah will be our avocation in this world and will accompany us to the world to come. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Please, Lord our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people, the house of Israel, so that we are descendants and their descendants, if we're blessed to have grandchildren, and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, may all know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. Let my heart be undivided in your statutes, in order that I may not be put to shame. I will never forget your precepts, for with them you have quickened me. Blessed are you, O Lord. Teach me your statutes. Amen, amen, amen. Selah forever. We give thanks before you, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that you have placed our lot among those who sit in the study hall, and that you have not given us our portion among those who sit idly on street corners. We rise early and they rise early. We rise early to pursue matters of Torah, and they rise early to pursue frivolous matters. We toil and they toil. We toil and receive a reward, and they toil and do not receive a reward. We run and they run. We run to the life of the world to come, and they run to the pit of destruction. As it is stated, but you, God, will bring them down into the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and deceit shall not live out half their days, but as for me, I will trust in you. May it be your will, Lord my God, just as you have assisted me in completing tractate Horayos, so assist me to begin other tractates and books and conclude them, to learn and to teach, to observe and to perform, and to fulfill all the teachings of your Torah with love. And may the merit of all the Tanaim and Amoraim and Torah scholars stand for me and my descendants, so that the Torah will not move from my mouth and from the mouths of my descendants and the descendants of my descendants forever. And may the verse, when you walk it shall lead you, and when you lie down it shall watch over you, and when you awaken it shall talk with you, be fulfilled in me. For in the Torah your days shall be multiplied, and the years of your life shall be increased. Length of days is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. May the Lord give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. And with that, we conclude Tractate Horayos. And we immediately begin Tractate Zevachim, which is all about offerings as they were brought when the temple was standing. We're not studying here what offerings you bring for what situations, which animals, which, if it was a sin offering, for what sin would trigger which animal. Here what we're talking about is the actual process of bringing animal offerings in the Holy Temple. Page 2, Mishnah 1, Chapter 1, Tractate Zevachim. all slaughtered offerings that were slaughtered not for their own sake, i.e., during the slaughtering, the slaughterer's intent was to sacrifice a different offering. They are fit, and one may continue their sacrificial rites and partake of their meat where that applies, right? A sin offering or a peace offering. But these offerings did not satisfy the obligation of the owner, in the case of a sin offering, who is therefore required to bring another offering. This is the law with regard to all offerings except for the Pesach, right? The special offering of Passover, sheep or goat, and the sin offering. In those cases, if the owner sacrificed them, not for their own sake, they are unfit, and we don't eat them, we don't complete the process. But there is a difference between the two exceptions. The Pesach is unfit only when sacrificed not for its own sake at its appointed time, on the 14th day of Nasan after noon, while the sin offering is unfit any time that it is sacrificed not for its own sake. Right? Somebody brought this animal for his sin offering, and then the priest in the temple who slaughtered it thought that he was slaughtering the animal for somebody else's obligation. He got the animals mixed up, and that would render it unfit to continue the process if it was a sin offering. If it was a different kind of offering, like the offerings of a Nazir completing his Naziris, they would finish the rite, and the attendant, all the details of bringing that offering, but the Nazir would still have to bring another animal in order to complete his Naziris, right? It would not discharge his obligation, even though the animal that was slaughtered, it would be considered a fit offering. Rabbi Eliezer says the guilt offering also is unfit when sacrificed not for its sake. According to his opinion, the correct reading of the Mishnah is the Pesach is unfit only at its appointed time, while the sin offering and the guilt offering are unfit at all times. If they were slaughtered with the wrong intent, then you just stop the process. Rabbi Eliezer said in explanation, the sin offering is brought for performance of a transgression, an unwitting transgression, and the guilt offering is brought for performance of a transgression. So just as a sin offering is unfit when sacrificed not for its own sake, so too the guilt offering is unfit when sacrificed not for its own sake. How do we distinguish between a guilt offering and a sin offering? Because the Torah says that for certain kinds of transgressions, you bring a guilt offering instead of a sin offering. Yosei ben Choni says, not only are the Pesach and the sin offering unfit when slaughtered not for their sake, but also other offerings that are slaughtered for the sake of a Pesach and for the sake of a sin offering are unfit. If, for example, they're accompanied by loaves or by meal, or by libation or anything like that, then those other, ancillary offerings that accompany the offering would also be rendered unfit. Yeah. Just a second. Yeah, exactly. So Shimon, the brother of Azariah, says that this is the distinction. With regard to all offerings, if one slaughtered them for the sake of an offering whose level of sanctity is greater than theirs, then they remain fit. But if one slaughtered them for the sake of an offering whose level of sanctity is less than what they should have been brought for, then they are rendered unfit. How so? Offerings of the most sacred order, Kadeshei Kadoshim, so this would include sin offerings and burnt offerings, that one slaughtered for the sake of offerings of lesser sanctity, for example, peace offerings, would be rendered unfit. But offerings of lesser sanctity, like a peace offering that one slaughtered thinking they were actually a sin offering, something of the holiest order, then they would remain fit. You don't have to, throw it out and interrupt the process. You can finish it. The person who wanted to bring a peace offering still has to bring it, but we don't stop the process. It remains fit and it can be eaten. Likewise, there is a distinction between different offerings of lesser sanctity. the bechor, right, the firstborn animal, and the animal tithe that one slaughtered for the sake of a peace offering are fit, as the sanctity of peace offerings is greater. Peace offerings that one slaughtered for the sake of a bechor or for the sake of an animal tithe would be rendered unfit because they're of lesser sanctity. The mistake was made and confused them with something of lesser sanctity. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. So the Mishnah teaches all slaughtered offerings that were slaughtered not for their sake are fit, but they did not satisfy the obligation of the owner to bring an offering. So the Gemara asks, why do I need the Mishnah to teach this law using the language which includes the word but, right? But they did not satisfy the obligation of the owner. Why not just say they remain fit and they do not satisfy the obligation of the owner? Why are we using the conjunction but instead of and? The Gemara responds by adding this word, right, Ella, which remember, but implies a whole word, and would have just been the suffix vav at the beginning of the word. So by adding this word, the Mishnah teaches us that the only deficiency with regard to these offerings is that they did not satisfy the obligation of the owner, but they retained their sanctity, and it is still prohibited to deviate from the protocol of their sacrificial process, i.e. the remaining rites, R-I-T-E-S, the remaining rites must be performed with proper intent. And the law is in accordance with the statement of Rava. As Rava says, with regard to a burnt offering that one slaughtered not for its sake, it is still prohibited to sprinkle its blood on the altar not for its sake. Right? You have to get back to being on track so you wouldn't continue to do something compounding the error. So the Gemara adds, if you wish, propose a logical argument to support this statement, and if you wish, cite a verse as proof. The Gemara elaborates, if you wish, propose a logical argument. Just because one deviated from protocol in its sacrifice once, i.e. in its slaughter, could it be that he should continue to deviate from protocol and all the rest of the sacrificial rites? One deviation does not justify additional deviations. Remember, slaughter is just one step in the process. Slaughter means it was shechted in the temple courtyard, slaughtered in a kosher manner, its blood collected, etc. Then it has to be, depending on the kind of offering, it might need to be cut into pieces, brought on the altar, burned there in its entirety, like a burnt offering, or certain parts of it burned on the altar, blood sprinkled, etc. There are all these other steps in the process of bringing an offering. But the animal that was slaughtered for the wrong kind of sacrifice. So then what do? Well, you know which animal it is now, so you continue its processes according to what it should have been, not continuing the error that it was slaughtered for something that it wasn't. And if you wish, cite a verse. Quote, that which has gone out of your lips you shall observe and do according to what you have vowed freely to the Lord your God, even that which you have promised with your mouth. Deuteronomy 23:24. So the Gemara interprets the words nadarta and nidava, that you vowed and freely, vowed, nadarta, and freely, nidava, interprets these words like this. Can this verse be referring to a gift offering, nidava? Now we're on page 2b. It is already referred to as a vow, a neder. Rather, the verse indicates that if you did what you vowed to do, i.e. you sacrificed your vow offering properly, it shall be a satisfactory vow offering. But if you did not sacrifice it properly, it shall be rendered a voluntary gift offering unrelated to the vow and shall not satisfy the obligation of your vow. So we'll finish the process of bringing that animal, since now you made a mistake, or someone made a mistake, but you still have to bring the animal that you vowed to bring. That's why you have not satisfied your obligation. And the Gemara concludes, and it is permitted to deviate from protocol in the sacrifice of a gift. And is it permitted to deviate from protocol in the sacrifice of a gift offering ab initio? Clearly it is not. Evidently, even if one of the sacrificial rites was performed for the sake of sacrificing a different offering, it is still prohibited to perform any of the other sacrificial rites in the incorrect manner. New topic. Ravina said to Rav Papa, since you were not with us last night within the Shabbos limit, the Chacham, right, 2,000 cubits, of Beharmach, you did not hear that Rava raises a contradiction between two superior Mishnaic statements and teaches their resolution, right? In other words, we had a geschmack, a tasty teaching in the study hall last night on Shabbos. Sorry you missed it, but I'm going to share it with you. So what are these superior statements? Well, we learned in the Mishnah, all slaughtered offerings that were slaughtered not for their sake are fit, but they did not satisfy the obligation of the owner, right? Our Mishnah. And Rava infers the reason they do not satisfy the obligation of the owner is specifically that they were slaughtered not for their sake. But if offerings were slaughtered without specification of intent, they as well did satisfy the obligation of the owner. So apparently, if one performs any action without specification of his intent, it is also considered as if he performed it expressly for its sake. Better you should say nothing and just do the action, and then we'll assume that you did the action with the correct intent. If you formulate what your intent is, and it turns out that you made a mistake, you expressed the wrong intent, okay, well then you either rendered the offering entirely unfit, or you rendered it something else which remains fit but doesn't satisfy your obligation. And Rava raised a contradiction from another Mishnah, tractate Gittin 24a. Any bill of divorce that was written not for the sake of the woman in question is not valid, right? Remember that we studied that. If a husband writes a bill of divorce and puts the wrong name in it and then they give it to his wife, they're not divorced because the bill of divorce has to be written specifically for her. Even if you had a bill of divorce that has the correct name of your wife, but it was actually written for another woman who had the same name, and then that guy decided not to divorce his wife, you can't recycle that get. And it is derived from the continuation of that Mishnah that if a get was written without specification as to which woman it is referring to, it is also not valid. You do need specific intent. It can't be unstated intent. And Rava resolves the contradiction there in Gittin with this about offerings by saying ordinary slaughtered offerings stand designated for their own sake from the time that the offering is consecrated. Its presumed end is that it will be slaughtered for the type of offering for which it was consecrated. Therefore, even if one slaughtering it has no particular intention, it is in effect considered slaughtered for its own sake. By contrast, an ordinary wife does not stand designated for divorce. A divorce is an unexpected break from the norm. Therefore, a bill of divorce is never presumed to be referring to a given woman unless it is specified explicitly. You can't learn out from the law of the get to the law of the unspecified intent of an offering. The Gemara, new topic, and I'm getting close to the end. Questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that slaughtered offerings are fit and even satisfy the obligation of the owner if slaughtered without specification? If we say it is from that which we learned in the Mishnah, that all slaughtered offerings that were slaughtered not for their own sake are fit, but these offerings did not satisfy the obligation of the owner, and it does not teach this using the language of all slaughtered offerings that were not slaughtered for their own sake are fit, but these offerings did not satisfy the obligation of the owner, then this cannot be. This formulation doesn't work. One cannot infer from this language that slaughter without specification is valid, since the Mishnah also teaches with regard to a get, a bill of divorce, that any bill of divorce that was written not for the sake of the woman is not valid. And it does not teach that was not written for the sake of the woman is not valid, and it is a given that a bill of divorce written without specification is not valid. So rather, perhaps we should be deriving this from that which we learned in a Mishnah on page 13a of this tractate. How are offerings slaughtered for their sake and then not for their sake? For example, one might slaughter the Pesach for the sake of a Pesach and then for the sake of a peace offering. How could you have like two different intents, one after the other? And the Gemara infers the reason such an offering is unfit is that he says that he is slaughtering it for the sake of the Pesach, which was what it was supposed to be. But then he says he is slaughtering it for the sake of a peace offering. In other words, he said, okay, this is my Pesach, I'm going to slaughter for the Pesach. But before he actually gets to the point of putting the knife on the throat of the animal and slaughtering it, he now makes a mistake and says, I'm slaughtering this animal for the sake of the peace offering that will accompany our Pesach. He confused the lambs. He had 2 lambs and he got them confused. So even though he first articulated the correct intent before he actually did the shechting, the slaughter, he then articulated the wrong intent. So do we follow his first statement or his last statement? The reason that such an offering is unfit is that he says he is slaughtering it for the sake of a Pesach, and then he says that he is slaughtering it for the sake of a peace offering. But if he says that he is slaughtering it for the sake of a Pesach, and then he slaughters it without specification, then it is fit. So apparently, slaughtering an offering without specification is considered as if one slaughtered it for its sake, okay, but only after he first formulated and expressed aloud the correct intent. So the Gemara responds, well, perhaps there it is different. As the Mishnah is saying that anyone who performs an action performs it with his original intent in mind. Therefore, since he specified initially that he was slaughtering the offering for the sake of the Pesach, there are no grounds to assume that he changed his mind. But here, by contrast, he pronounced no initial statement of proper intent. So do we still say that an animal that is slaughtered with no expression of intent remains fit? We haven't fully settled that question. So rather, perhaps this law is derived from the latter clause of that Mishnah. How are offerings slaughtered not for their sake and then for their sake? For example, one might slaughter the Pesach for the sake of a peace offering and then for the sake of the Pesach. So the Gemara infers the reason it is unfit is that he says he is slaughtering for the sake of the peace offering, when in fact it was the Pesach. So he makes the mistake first. And then he says he's slaughtering for the sake of the Pesach, which is the original correct intent. But if he started slaughtering it without specification and then slaughtered it for the sake of Pesach, it is fit. So apparently, if one slaughters an offering without specification, it still satisfies the obligation of the owner in these circumstances. And the Gemara responds, perhaps there it is different, as the Mishnah is saying that his ultimate intent proves the nature of his original intent. Since his ultimate intent was to sacrifice it as a Pesach, the way he originally intended when he consecrated the animal, that was presumably his original intent as well. But here, by contrast, where we just have no express intent, we can't rely on that ruling. So alternatively, it can be explained that even if one's ultimate intent is not considered proof of his original intent, the Mishnah still uses the same term in both clauses to preserve symmetry. Since in the former clause, the Tana taught using the language for their sake and then not for their sake, teaching that original intent is considered proof of ultimate intent, the Tana also taught the second clause using the language not for their sake and then for their sake. In any event, there is no proof from that Mishnah that an obligation slaughtered without any specification sacrifices its owner's obligation. So, rather, perhaps this law is derived from the Mishnah on page 46b of this tractate, which states the offering is slaughtered for the sake of 6 matters. For the sake of the particular offering, for the sake of the one sacrificing the offering, its owner, for the sake of God, for the sake of consumption by the fires of the altar, for the sake of sacrificing it in a manner that gives an aroma, and for the sake of pleasing God. And the sin offering and a guilt offering are slaughtered also for the sake of the atonement of sin. In other words, these are all purposes that are accomplished when one brings an offering. And that Mishnah on 46b continues that Rabbi Yosef said, even in the case of one who did not have in mind to slaughter the offering for the sake of any one of these, the offering still is fit, since this is a stipulation of the court, that if you don't specify intent, the court assigns to you the correct intent. And the Gemara explains Rabbi Yosef's opinion. The court stipulated that one should not say that he is slaughtering the offering for its sake, lest he come to say that he is slaughtering not for its sake, lest he make a mistake. Better you should just keep your mouth shut, and then we'll assume you did what you intended to do. So the Gemara infers, and if it enters your mind that if one slaughters an offering without specification, it is unfit, would the court arise and stipulate a matter that disqualifies the offering? Clearly, the offering slaughtered without specification is fit, and it satisfies the obligation of its owner. We'll stop there. I'll take some questions, and then we'll come back tomorrow, Wednesday, at the regular Wednesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Just reloading the question document here. I'll just mention Saturday night. Today's Tuesday, so just looking ahead a few days. Saturday night, well, I'll remind you of this on Friday. We won't have class Saturday night. So East Coast people, you can get some sleep Saturday night because I'm going to have to rush as soon as Shabbos ends here. I have to go do a Q&A of a special screening in Malibu, and please God, I can get there on time. But I won't be able to teach the class and get there on time, so that we won't have class Saturday night. Okay, questions on today's Horayos 14 and Zevachim 2. Sharon, I was at a wedding in Lakewood, New Jersey. People would stand when their rabbi entered the room. I had not seen this before and had to ask why different people stood at different times, right? Because not everybody recognizes the greatness of some rabbi that they might never have met. They don't know. He's a Rosh Yeshiva, but he's not their Rosh Yeshiva. And so you saw that I'm sure it was a very large wedding, and that the students of particular rabbis who run yeshivas were standing for their Rosh Yeshiva. But if, Rabbi Kanevsky would enter the room, someone of that magnitude that everyone recognizes, then everybody would have stood. Joseph, I think it is critical for learning wisdom and humility, which is also central to learning, that one who did not learn something from the wise does not have anything to say about the matter. Lovely. Well done. Ernest, does this mean the exilarch was Daniel the prophet? I think what you're saying is, was Daniel the exilarch, right? In other words, was Daniel in his time considered the exilarch? That's a very interesting question. Here, when we're talking about the exilarch, the Reish Galusa, right, the head of the Jewish community in the diaspora, which specifically meant the head of the Jewish community in Bavel. There we're talking about after the destruction of the Second Temple, really like in the years, toward the end of the Second Temple period, around the year 0, Temple destroyed in the year 70, all the way up through the closing of the Gemara in about the year 500 of the Common Era. And in that period, that 500-year period, we're talking about the head of the Jewish community in Bavel. Daniel the prophet lived after the destruction of the first temple in the Babylonian exile and before the construction of the second temple. So that is quite a bit earlier, right? There we're talking about 400 years and 50 years before the construction of, or 450 years before this period even began, that we're talking about, the sages in Bavel. Why was there a Jewish community in Bavel? Because, right, because of the destruction of the first temple and the Babylonian exile, and so many people were taken over there by Nebuchadnezzar. So, was Daniel the head of the Jewish community? Probably. Was he considered the Reish Galusa? It's a great question. I'm not sure. But as we've seen, he was a prophet, and maybe he was the kind of spiritual leader. But when we talk about they appointed a political leader, like a king in exile, they tended to be descendants of David, of King David. And I don't know that Daniel the prophet was a descendant of King David. I kind of doubt it, but I'm not sure. So great question. I don't really know the answer. Joseph, did the sages achieve their position based on their rabbinic lineage or their midos and learning, and maybe both? And the answer is both. Both. Certainly there were many who only achieved it from their learning and their refinement of character. Rabbi Akiva only started learning when he was 40 and ended up becoming one of the greatest sages ever, but he had no lineage, he had no parentage to stand for him. Rabbi Meir, that we've been talking about today, and again, considered one of the greatest sages of all time. I read today this tradition that he was actually the son, the descendant of converts, and converts of a royal Roman family. Rabbi Meir was actually related to Roman emperors. I never heard that until today, so I think that's pretty interesting. But on the other hand, there were other people like the Nassis, right? So the descendants of Hillel, who definitely had that kind of lineage. Also, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah definitely had lineage in that sense. So, it was a mix. It could go either way. And Sharon, but it was definitely, and we saw it yesterday, right? It was definitely a meritocracy. That as much as, a priest is higher than a Levite, and a Levite is higher than a Yisrael, and a Yisrael is higher than a Mamzer, and a Mamzer is higher than a Gibeonite, all those different levels. But anybody who has great Torah learning jumps to the head of the class. It was a meritocracy. And finally, Sharon, if I remember correctly, wasn't Rabbi Meir a student of Rav Yosef, as was Rabbi Elisha ben Abuye? Rabbi Meir was a student of Rabbi Elisha ben Abuye, or at least a colleague, but I think a student. Rabbi Meir was definitely a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rav Yosef was later, right? Rav Yosef was an Amora in Bavel, and a contemporary or a teacher of Abaye. Rav Yosef was Abaye's teacher. He was a contemporary of Rabbah, as we saw. But they were later. I'm pretty sure that they were later. So I don't think that Rabbi Meir was a student of Rav Yosef, but I would have to research a little bit more. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.